Hey, hi everybody, welcome to Life After Mental Illness. I'm Bill MacPhee, your recovery expert, and remember, recovery is when you wouldn't want to be anyone else other than who you are today. Well, today I'm here in St. John, New Brunswick, Canada, and I just finished a little earlier today a half-a-day workshop or speaking engagement on recovery. And one of the organizers was my friend here, Greg Zed, and Greg, I've known Greg for about 25, 30 years. I first met Greg when I was on the board of the Schizophrenia Society of Canada way back many years ago, and Greg was a board member as well. Greg has a lot of experience in mental health. He's had many jobs. He's a great guy. So what I want to do is I'm going to let you introduce yourself, Greg, how you'd like to. Tell us about your background, and then speak on recovery, and then anything you want to come to your mind that you think is important. And if you wanted to start, you could talk about today's event. But give us some of your background in that.
Well, thank you very much, Bill. It's just fantastic. I can't say enough how great it is and how inspiring today was, and particularly with your involvement and the people with lived experience and family members and clinicians. It was just awesome to see a sold-out crowd in our community, and I'm only regret is that it took me about 40 years to get you here. So I really enjoyed that.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's quite true. I've had some passion that started in my earlier years when I first went to Centricare, which is our psychiatric hospital in St. John. And it was just around the time they were starting to think about deinstitutionalization. And I had a really good experience for the first 20 years of my life. I was a social worker and then became the director of the department, but always had been grounded in working with families and in individuals with life experience. And interestingly enough, it literally took me those 20 years to learn not what was in the books that I studied to get the degrees, to open up the doors, to get the jobs, but really listening to those with lived experience. So I am forever grateful for that.
Right.
I'm forever grateful for your involvement too
Wow.
with the Schizophrenia Society of Canada that saw us do great things.
Right. Thanks. And one of the things Greg and I were talking about earlier is that Greg worked way back. We talked about institutionalization, and we talked way back where Greg, when they had huge institutions, they would put 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 people in institutions because really there's no meds for mental illness, and it's a young field, and you're in there. And we said, people would bring their suitcases in. They'd put their suitcases in the attic because they never expected anybody to come out. And there were thousands of people in these institutions, and deinstitutionalization was when they got the idea that people can come out into the community, but as we know, the supports weren't there. And I'm sure the same thing happened in the U.S., which is 10 times bigger in the U.S., and that's why there's 10 times the problems that they would have. But that's turned out kind of to nip them, to really be a poor thing, a poor planning of what they've done.
Yeah.
If I can I'll let you know, but just to kind of give an analogy, for example, in China, they have the one-child policy, right, where they would say that you could only have one child, and if you had another child, you'd have to pay extra taxes. They couldn't go to school, and all the killing of the girls and everything like that. But China today is in very big trouble because there's so many boys and not enough girls, and society is really screwed up. The excuse the expression, but they had that problem, which was not enough planning, not enough thinking forward and thinking things out, and we went through the same thing, right?
Yeah, and in mental health, to be fair, with the planners then, and I was just a greenhorn coming out of university, I suspect anyone that didn't fit in would automatically go to the hospital. So for example, if someone had too much to drink on the weekend, the police would pick them up, take them over. There was no admission procedure. we would just be the open door, and it only really swung one way. And I got to hear the stories, and of interest, while I had to do my clinical work, which was getting social histories and things like that, the listening of the stories led me to believe, to ask individuals with lived experience, well, what is it you want? What is it you want to do in life that something got in the way, a crisis, today they call it trauma, and it interfered with that ongoing development or the personal development that they had. And so whether it was over a game of pool, or I'd always have my office stocked with coffee, and in those days cigarettes, I would communicate. And as God knows, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth to listen twice as much as we talk. I start listening and learning, and boy, oh boy, the amount of information that I got. And then when I got involved with the Schizophrenia Society, a passionate group that were talking about families and their access to service and getting their loved ones, and they certainly weren't malicious. They wanted the best for their loved one. And I noticed immediately, young in my career, and I was blessed. I have to say I was purely blessed, because I found that the way we treated the mentally ill was totally different than if someone was involved with heart or diabetes or an illness. Even births. I mean, every Tom, Dick, and Harry knows when someone has a child born. There's a celebration, there's cigars, there's this, that, and the other thing. If you were shunned away in a psychiatric hospital or even in a psychiatric unit, you know, it was, did you know so-and-so is admitted? And there's that sort of stigma that I picked up on early, and I spent at least that first 20 years of my career saying we've got to do better and we've got to do it differently. So then that evolved, and over time I helped the province of New Brunswick actually participate in a 10-year plan, which is deinstitutionalization. And the way we did it here in New Brunswick was carefully planned, and the premier, then premier was Frank McKenna. He wanted to fund it, and he wanted to make sure it was sustainable. So for 10 years, and it sounded like a lot of time, we developed a 10-year plan, and we transferred responsibility where the 90% of our institutional budget was for mental health, leaving the community only 10%. So we transferred the dollars with the individuals, so every single individual that was discharged to the hospital wasn't just open the door and out to the streets. It was in a planned fashion with a, what one would now call a recovery plan, with built-in follow-up, recreation, education, training, etc., etc. And in the province of New Brunswick, that was the beginning of the development of 13 regional mental health centers that now literally treat probably 80 to 90% of individuals who have never seen a hospital. After the hospital closed, it was like the old adage says, work yourself out of a job. I was laid off. And unfortunately, it was about a year after I was married, and I said, my God, what am I going to do? And ironically, a colleague of mine says, look, Greg, I'm in Sussex, and I'm retiring. Why don't you apply for the job? So I applied for the job, and I became the director of a community mental health center in Sussex. And then I said, wow, this is my opportunity to take a community of Sussex, catchment area of about 25, 30,000 people, and in that area, plan, organize, and listen to the people and what they want. And I would say, in a very humble way, that if you were to go to Sussex now and talk to people with lived experience or families in the next 20 years of my life, I don't think I can count on one hand the number of complaints, the concerns. Why? Because we listen. We manifested art therapy. We've got music. We've got recovery-based programs. In fact, there's a waiting list, if you want, not for mental health services. Waiting was to get into self-help groups, the best I can be, run by peer specialists who have got now formal training. There was no formal training back then, and they run groups. So that was the next 20 years, an opportunity for me in a small community that was controllable without the politics of hospital versus community and things like that, being able to work with whomever and to work with individuals to realize their dreams. So if I were to say something to move on to what is recovery, I think you've said it best in your opening remarks. Recovery is when an individual wants something that they're not at that time, and to work with the individual, to see how we can get there. If I want to be an athlete, and I want to be in the NHL, or I want to be a baseball star, what are the pathways to get there? And to give people those opportunities. It's opportunities.
It's about opportunities, absolutely, and dreaming and thinking big, everything like that. And wanting what people have. Now, so you would say that New Brunswick is really very up to speed in mental health compared to other provinces in that. And
I would say so. I think that the benefit that New Brunswick has is 750,000 people, which isn't a lot when you look at Ontario or Quebec or the rest of Canada, as a matter of fact. So there's a network. Let's say that. There's a network of services. Now, spun off from that, you will always have the outliers, which is private psychiatry, and you have private therapists, and you have private counseling for people at work and things like that. But at least the province of New Brunswick has been true to its dream to establish and fund well. They have moved now into full-fledged recovery-based programming. They signed the declaration with the Mental Health Commission of Canada as, I think, one of the only provinces, and I know Horizon Health, which is my employer, has certainly signed on the Declaration of Recovery. Everything has to have the recovery lens. And so it really is the next step is to now put recovery into action. And I think today was sort of the tip of the iceberg where we had individuals, family members, and people with lived experience saying, okay, where and how does the rubber meet the road? And today was an excellent demonstration of that.
It was a good day, a very good conference, So anyways, what I wanted to move a little bit forward. Now you talked about, in New Brunswick. Now, I know that you have a new charge, you have a new job, and we'll talk about that. But, and maybe didn't even exist, you have to explain this. But I know that in Ontario, Canada, where I come from, is that we do have mental health courts, where people with mental illness who are known by the police as, maybe trespassing or loitering or something like that. They're in the court and judges used to see them and they didn't know what to do with them. And so I know in Ontario not too long ago, we started mental health courts. And now in New Brunswick, I don't know if this is the beginning of it or things going, but now you have the charge of a new job about developing mental health court, right? Talk a little bit about your position now and that.
I will, and I think, to be fair, New Brunswick didn't have mental health courts, but we did have the passion of a judge many, many years ago. Judge Al Breen, who is well known and has since retired, started in his court because for the same reasons that you had just mentioned. He noticed in his court a number of individuals, and he would almost say, Greg, they were pathetic. They were individuals that were off their medication, they were trespassing, or they did petty theft, or they did any of the things that any one of us would do in terms of survival.
And they're on the street.
Right. So he said, every second Friday, I am going to hold a special court, and it's called Mental Health Court. And it actually started around the same time there was a court Judge Ornstein in Ontario, in
Yes.
Toronto.
Yes.
Now, Judge Breen's model, if you want, was very compassionate. He did things very slowly, and he worked with the individual as long as the individual assumed responsibility of the behavior. Not pled guilty,
Right.
but assume responsibility. And the end result was very telltale, because what we found is two things. One, anyone that went through his mental health court never ended up with a criminal offense, so that was stayed.
Right.
And secondly, it engaged the individuals who no longer were homeless. We had 85% of the individuals who went through court have never reoffended. We have had close to 90% reduction in hospitalizations and readmissions, and any trips to the emergency department for any psychotic break was almost offloaded to treatment, because in mental health court you had wraparound services. And I oversaw that until the demise of the court, and interestingly enough, the demise wasn't anything to do with the structure, it was the retirement of the judge.
Oh.
So, to move forward,
Yeah.
the current minister said, we want to get it right this time. Not that the 15-year history that New Brunswick has had from, say, 1995 to 2005 at least, it went that long. But he wants to ensure that every community that has capacity for mental health court is available. So now the model that they've asked me to build is to take a model, go around the province, talk to the mental health clinics. I cited earlier the 13 or 14 clinics that we have. Engage the Crown, engage the defense, engage the judicial system, engage families, engage individuals with lived experience, create a model that we can roll out province-wide.
And you know what, you mentioned to this too. Now, you mentioned about the judge and the compassion and understanding and all that, and we know about prosecutions and the defense law. But I know that very much so in Ontario, that, you know, you don't have the defense and the Crown going back and forth. Everybody in Ontario court systems, mental health court, want the best for the individual, and they all play that role, and they work as a team. It's no prosecutor really wants to put somebody with mental illness in jail, right? And so they work with each other to try to find solutions. And that's something that is, I'm sure, going to happen here and be a big part of it as well. Solutions.
We've already seen that, Bill, and in fact, I was humbled to be a guest speaker by the Mental Health Commission. They attended and asked me to speak about suicide, which is a passion of mine, and suicide prevention in Toronto just 2 weeks ago. And who did I come across? The Chief Crown Prosecutor of the Nova Scotia Mental Health Court. And she says to me, she is a person with lived experience, Eileen McGinty. She's invited me down to Dartmouth to see how they do it. And just as you say, the Crown works with the defense. They look at the charge, they look at the treatment plan brought in, and the difference in the model that's created is the coordination of it and the case management of it, if you want, is more or less maneuvered by the mental health people involved. So we would sit down at a pre-conference and take a look at, what do we really need? What does this recovery plan look like? And we do that with the individual, with the family, and then we say, how can we move this forward? So as long as the individual is cooperative, as long as the individual is taking responsibility for his or her behavior, as long as the individual wants to participate in recovery and changing the way things have been, and let's face it, one doesn't have to be mentally ill to want to change. We talk about motivation, we talk about habits, we talk about a whole raft of things. The difference in this particular case is that an individual that is in the formal mental health system has no hope, often feels helpless, has low expectations,
Right.
and haven't even got, for example, a feeling that it is their right to have recovery. You know, the whole model is based on compliance, and if you do this, and if you do this, very subservient. And I don't mean that in a negative or anti-professional fashion, but it's not individual, and it's really not in the best interest of the individual, because the plan doesn't belong to the individual.
Right.
The piece that we've also added on to mental health court is that when we do the assessment, we begin on day one with the individual developing a recovery plan. What is it you think, for example, can help you, and how do you see mental health court being the vehicle to make you
Right.
into what you want to be?
Right. It's another support. It's an added layer of
Yeah.
support in the forensic system. Yeah.
Yeah, the other point I want to make is, and I think it's very important, particularly anyone that might be watching this blog associated with length of service. Again, I want to say I have felt right from the get-go, if any questions about higher power, I mean, I can speak about higher power because I've had 41 years without a sick day. In the addiction and mental health field, I've always felt this way. I have now seen the harvest. I've seen where we all know what is best in this situation, and now I'm seeing it being played out. And I have that same passion that I had when I had hair, and I met you. And I mean, to be able...
When I met you, I had hair too.
Yes. But really, when you can turn around at 40 years in a career, and rather than just drift off and sort of, as they say, rest on your laurels, you go in and you venture into a new area with the same passion that will just bring and excite and electrify people and change their lives forever. In fact, Bill, I have to say, a bit of humbling experience today. A lady come up to me and she says, "Hi, do you remember me?" And I said, "I know the face. I don't know if that's an age thing, but I know the face." She said, 4 years ago in your office, you and my son sat at your table over a cup of coffee, and you were explaining to my son, who wouldn't listen to anyone and it wouldn't do anything, that you wanted to help, but you needed to include the family. That the mother in this case was not the enemy. The enemy was the illness. And she says, you know, he's married, he just bought a piece of land, he's building a house, he's got $65,000 as a down payment. And I just said, you know, I have to almost say, yeah, I remember that. And, you know, and when you see 600-800 people a year and you hear stories like that, I had to excuse myself. And I went, she's, where are you going? I said, you know, you're making me cry. Because there's someone who the mother said, there's no negotiation with him. He lives in my house. He won't come out of the basement. He won't do this. He won't shovel a walk. He won't. And I said to the young fella, I said, look, the illness is the enemy. What we have to do is we have to find what part of the puzzle is missing. And I can bring to the table a piece, whether it be the psychiatrist, whether it be the nurse, whether it be myself, whether it be a contact with employment, but we want to figure out what can we do to help you. He's a Boilermaker. He's now back working full time. And you know, you just sit back and you say, it's not the salary and it's not the money that you can get with disposable income or a trip or anything like that. It's in the lives of human beings that have lived the recovery model to the fullest extent. And the empowerment that that lady felt in that room 4 years ago. It's like the grade 7 teacher that tells you,
Yeah.
Bill, got the right.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah.
The other comment I'd like to make that I think is very, very important, and none of us, unless there's some people out there that really feel they play that role, none of us ever realize the impact we make on people. You know, we sit back and say, what is your turning point? We all have turning points. For me, I remember I applied for a job as the director of social work. I was in the acting position, and they were going to Toronto. They're going to bring this big, highfalutin PhD down to run the social work department in my hometown. And a psychiatrist at a board meeting, in a very foul way, was quite agitated. And he said, are you people stupid? And he looked, and the board in those days were men of power and the odd female, and says, this man has worked his fingers to the bone. He works 7 days a week. He cares. It's his community, and on and on. And singing my praises, and on and on. Dr. John Terrio is who I'm speaking of, the late John Terrio. And he pushed and pushed and pushed that board till they recanted the decision to bring someone down. Even my boss of the day said, Greg, are you stupid? We could bring this expert down from Toronto, and you could learn so much from her. And I was like a kid, you know, you took my toy away. This was my calling, like in the priesthood. It was my calling. And I said, wow. I want it to be, because in my family, my mother would say, oh, you're just a social worker. And this was, oh, now I'm the boss. So it had perhaps third generation Lebanese in our family. You had to show that you sort of had a title. And, you know, I know we do it to our kids. Where are you? Success is often saying how many degrees you have, and on and on and on. But it's not that. It's success is what you want to be.
Okay, Greg, I think we're going to end there.
Okay.
Thanks for this interview. Thanks for the hospitality. You're going out now. You're going to buy me dinner, right? We're going out for dinner.
We're going
and
for
so
dinner.
you folks, thanks for tuning in. And remember that there is life after mental illness, and recovery is when you wouldn't want to be anyone else other than who you are today. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. Hi. Thank you for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And follow me on Facebook and Twitter.